All right, we're going to start to the second on time. Cool. So for those of you who don't know or never saw it, 2 years ago at TABConf, in fact, I gave a talk on all the problems with Lightning, how terrible Lightning is, how completely screwed Lightning is. Because I thought 2 years ago, people were just way too bullish on Lightning. Lightning had a lot of problems, a lot of things to figure out. Now people are just way too bearish on Lightning. So we're going to try the same talk again. We're going to go through the same content, and we're just going to flip the script, and we're going to talk about how great Lightning is and how all these problems are actually minor problems, and it's fine. And hopefully at the end of this, we'll find a nice happy medium between too bullish and too bearish. So basically the same talk. So if you've already seen that talk, you're going to be a little bored, but I'll try to keep it a little funny. And you're going to have to laugh at my bad jokes. I'm sorry. So Lightning is hard. We're getting there. We've fixed most of the problems. We've got some stuff coming still. But I'm really talking about non-custodial Lightning, real Lightning, right? Not this nonsense custodial garbage. Real non-custodial Lightning, ideally on a phone. People also talk about Lightning as a settlement layer for L2s or whatever, and that's cool, but no, I'm talking about real non-custodial Lightning for like end users to use Lightning. It's going to be great. This is a brief overview of the list of things. I don't know why I put that there. You don't need to read it. It's fine. Anyway, so my sister-in-law is Gen Z, which makes me an expert on all things Gen Z. You guys are really going to have to laugh at my bad jokes. I'm sorry. Please stick with me. Anyway, so Gen Z, they do everything on their phones, which means Lightning has to work on a phone. There's just no way around it. And 2 years ago, I talked about all the problems with that. Of course, Lightning has always and continues to assume that the sender and the recipient are online at the same time. This is somewhat problematic, both for Lightning, kind of non-custodial on a phone. Your phone's not always online. Sometimes the mobile operating system doesn't give you any CPU time. But also, it's problematic for things like Fedimint wanting to use Lightning, or because maybe the whole Mint has to Federation has to sign stuff in Lightning, and that's a whole lot of time to wait for a payment, and it's not really online live. But I did mention 2 years ago about how we're going to solve this. It turns out you can just ask someone if they're online. It's really not that hard. Like the sender can just say, hey, are you online right now? Oh, okay, here, I'll send the payment now. And that's what we're going to do. It's not crazy complicated. It's great. Now we have these onion message things. So if I want to know if you're online, I can just ask you. And we now have a native messaging layer in Lightning for little tiny messages. In fact, it's just one bit. Like, hey, are you online? Yes, I'm currently online. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that. Actually, if Alice wants to pay Dave, Alice needs to talk to Dave's LSP, and Dave needs to talk to Alice's LSP. But once we do that, it's fine. We can make the whole thing asynchronous. We can make the whole thing no longer make that assumption. And yeah, so 2 years ago, I mentioned this as an idea that we're going to have eventually. Now with Bolt 12 and onion messages, we're building this stuff based on Bolt 12. We have onion messages, so we can do these messages to see when someone's online. And hopefully this is something that you'll be able to play with in the first half of next year. So we've made good progress on it. The kind of spec of high level and most of the details have been worked out. And people are actually writing the code for this. So hopefully it works great. The UX is going to paper over all of the online stuff. And it's going to be great. OK, punishment. No, this is not an uninspired name for a new BDSM club. 2 years ago, I talked about how broken the privacy model of watchtowers was. And of course, everyone knows that watchtowers are required for Lightning to work. There's no way we can have Lightning without watchtowers everywhere. Or at least that's what I was told. But we've had this punishment thing from day one. We've always had it, and we'll probably continue to have it. If you broadcast an old state, right, so the whole thing of we have to have watchtowers, right? Someone could broadcast an old state, and then that's going to hit the chain, and then you're going to be offline, and then they're going to get that state confirmed, and then they're going to be able to steal some of your money because you've been offline. But I mean, they can't do that if you happen to come online, and if they do that, you can at least take 1% of the channel capacity, 1% of the total channel capacity as punishment. Sometimes a lot more, but if they're being clever about how they do the attack, it's 1%. And, okay, if it's a small, tiny channel, 1% is not a whole lot of money, but, if we're talking about trying to actually make money with this, you kind of exploit a fairly large channel. You have to make sure the thing is going to be offline, which really only works if you're an LSP and you have a lot of these mobile clients who are like actually going to be offline sometimes. So this attack only really makes sense if you're like, you're an LSP, you have a ton of like these mobile clients and you're trying to close out a ton of channels, and then some of them take their money back and punish you, and maybe not all of them, but why are you doing this? Attack just doesn't make any sense. So as long as you're actually like kind of online, if you're an LSP and you're actually going to be online once every 2 weeks or whatever it is, then you're going to lose a little money on fees, but you're actually going to come out fine. That 1% is probably going to pay for the fees. So the whole like watchtower, we have to have watchtowers for Lightning to work, never really made any sense. And sure, there's still bugs here, right? So people might restore an old backup, and then your Lightning node automatically broadcasts the stale state, and then you lose some money, you lose your 1%, or maybe a whole lot more. But we're fixing those too. In fact, we've made good progress on that. Historically, there's already when you reconnect to a peer, you make sure that you're at the same state. And if you're not, you can actually detect, the peer will prove to you that you are stale and that you're using a stale backup before you even go to do anything. So you immediately learn that, you don't have to broadcast anything, and you won't lose your money. So we've been doing that for a long time. But there's also now peer backups, so your peers will happily store a little bit of data for you so that you can actually remember what the latest state is. And then there's also VSS and other kind of server-assisted backup things where you can have redundant backups. You don't necessarily need a watchtower as long as you're actually going to be online once every 2 weeks, or most users are going to be online once every 2 weeks. But you do need some kind of like reliable backup thing. So, we can use a server there, like not a watchtower, but something much dumber and much simpler and much easier to build. And especially for mobile clients, a lot of people have built various things, either using iCloud storage or Google or whatever. But so this is like not really a thing that happens anymore. So everything's kind of working out. And yeah, we talked 2 years ago about how we needed L2 and we needed to compress these states that the watchtowers have to maintain and all the data we have to back up. But it's just not that much data. Who cares? A few hundred kilobytes, a few megabytes. We can store a few megabytes. It's not that hard. So maybe L2 was overrated too. It was this stuff works. Stuff works very well, and the UX challenges that we had with it were actually just UX challenges. They weren't protocol level things, and we've made really good progress in the last few years. Okay, so pinning. Everyone remembers what pinning is, right? You can all map it out on a whiteboard. Everybody's good? Pinning, I don't have to cover it? All right, maybe we'll cover it real quick. So, okay, you've got these commitment transactions. Turns out Lightning always made this kind of pseudo assumption that you know what the fees are going to be in 3 months. So if I ask somebody from the audience, what is the fee to get into the blockchain going to be 3 months from now at a specific block height? I'm sure you're all going to be able to answer that. Give me an exact number. It's going to be great. 1 sat. No. No. Not 1 sat. So, we always kind of made this assumption. Even as of 2 years ago, it wasn't necessarily fully deployed, but these days it is basically everywhere, and nodes are starting to require it. This anchors concept, right? So if you have the commitment transaction in Lightning that we need to get confirmed, potentially 3 months from now at an unknown fee rate, we can do CPFP. CPFP is great. We love CPFP. And we can have that second transaction hang on it with a very large fee rate, and we can get that thing confirmed. This was mostly good. I mean, it fixed some of the UX challenges, not necessarily protocol level issues. It didn't fix things like pinning, right? So pinning is this concept of, there are denial of service limits in Bitcoin Core, and you have to have some denial of service limits to prevent people from just spamming transactions all the time. And if I can somehow get our transactions to be right up against that denial of service limit, then you're not going to be able to broadcast something because it's just going to look like a denial of service attack, right? It's like, okay, we've used up the limit. Now we're going to, you can't broadcast another transaction because it's just going to look like it's going to hit that limit and going to be able to prevent you from broadcasting something. This is kind of somewhat inherent in having denial of service limits. But I'll save you the detailed explanation. You can go watch the talk from last year. I walked through the whole transaction structure, or 2 years ago. It's not really all that interesting. But guess what? We've got a fix. Bitcoin Core 28 is all unicorns and rainbows. Everything is wonderful. Please upgrade your nodes so Lightning can use it. But we finally have a real fix for pinning stuff. So it's transaction version 3. I mentioned it 2 years ago. It was like on the horizon. It was it was something that was coming soon, and it's finally here. It only took 2 years, but so now with Lightning, we can actually say, okay, nodes, we can opt into this whole other relay scheme, and we can say, all right, nodes, Lightning nodes can build their transactions in such a way that Bitcoin Core nodes will say, ah, yes, that is asking for different treatment in the mempool and the denial of service structure and how we do limit transactions. Is asking for totally different treatment, and I'm going to treat it totally differently, and this is going to guarantee that CPFP and that commitment transaction can always reliably propagate through the network. And even on top of that, on top of TXV3, we also needed package relay, right? So we have this commitment transaction and a sub-transaction, CPFP, right? We have 2 transactions. They both have to get into the mempool, and if there's a mempool min fee, right, if the mempool's full and the fee rate to get into the mempool to begin with is 3 sats per vbyte, and my commitment transaction's only 2, well, I can't relay the 2 things together. I have to relay them separately, and you can't get one thing in if it doesn't meet the minimum, and so I can't relay anything at all. That's now finally fixed. So again, please upgrade your Bitcoin Core nodes to 28, because if you don't, Lightning is continually broken, but it's like here now. Now we need to change Lightning commitment transaction structure to use TXV3, but that's coming soon. It's important for other reasons. So again, very close on the horizon, package relay here now, solving real problems with anchors, and then TXV3 is going to solve all these theoretical pinning attacks, and maybe not theoretical pinning attacks, but seems like no one's exploited them, so hey, it's all well that ends well, right? Okay, so pinning is great. We've solved it. Problem solved. All right, flood and loot. Yeah. So flood and loot is a super old paper. It was fairly early, not long after Lightning came out. It's kind of the things like, you can't solve this. You can't solve flood and loot. In fact, it's just pretty simple attack, right? I'm going to open 1 million channels, and then I'm going to relay a bunch of HTLCs in them, and then I'm going to close all the channels. Or I'm going to tell my peers to close channels. There's just not enough block space. You just can't get all those channels on chain before the HTLCs start timing out, and you run into all these timeouts, and you can't get it. There's just literally not enough chain space, and that's going to let this attacker theoretically claim some portion of those HTLCs or some portion of channel funds for themselves, even though they're not necessarily entitled to it. In fact, even the original Lightning paper talked about this style of attack, right? And argued that we need super flexible block sizes, and we need to be able to spike the block size up to, a few hundred megabytes or something. Which probably is never going to happen, but talked about the risk here, right? And indeed, there is no kind of wholesale fix aside from maybe that. And I don't like falling back on trust here, but it seems to just kind of all work, right? So the cost to actually exploit this attack is non-trivial. You got to open a lot of channels, and the core of the Lightning network. And no, I don't mean core Lightning. I mean the main nodes in the Lightning network. They're all fairly large. Plebnet has kind of faded a little bit, and a lot of big companies and a lot of large entities or whatever are now running large nodes, and that's kind of formed the core of the network. And these nodes are well known, and even the plebnet nodes that are still around are now fairly large, or many of them are now fairly large and have long reputation, right? So we can make some reasonable assumptions about how likely they are to exploit this kind of attack. Certainly none of the large for-profit regulated businesses are going to exploit this kind of attack. But even well-known Lightning nodes operated by known people are probably also not going to exploit this kind of attack. And if they do, you can sue them. Okay, so how would you go about exploiting this kind of attack today? You'd have to spin up a bunch of new nodes, or at least spin up a lot of new channels, maybe one node, maybe many nodes, whatever it is. But the Lightning Network has been very stable in terms of channels and nodes for a while. The channel sizes have grown, but in terms of actual node count, it's pretty stable. So we would probably see this, right? We would see like, oh, well, the channel number's going up. What's going on? And people might actually identify some of this issue before it happens. You would also, kind of be on the edge, right? In order to do this, you would be on the edges of the network. And that would probably make this attack maybe a little less profitable, or at least at a minimum, it wouldn't kind of take down the Lightning Network. So flood and loot's still a problem. We do fall back on trust here a little bit, but in practice, you have this kind of core of the Lightning Network that is pseudo-trusted and at least has some reputation attached to it, right? This doesn't necessarily have to have real names attached to it, but nodes that have been around for many years have some amount of reputation built up and makes this attack a little less likely, even if not more difficult. So no great answer here. All right, maybe Lightning's not completely fixed, but hey, it seems to be fine, right? All security is fine. That's how it works. As long as no one's exploiting it, everything is fine. All right. So routing. 2 years ago, I talked a lot about how hard routing is, and it is a fundamentally hard topic. There was actually a talk on it at 10 that might still be happening next door. Talking about just, how do we route within the Lightning Network? You have all these nodes, and you have all these channels in front of you, and you got to pick a path, and you have to hope that that path is both cheap, low fee rate, but also reliable, that those nodes have enough liquidity right now, not 5 minutes ago, but right now, to route your payment. And that's, kind of hard. Like, how do you do this? So we need smart routing, and in fact, you still need smart routing. If you don't have particularly smart routing, it doesn't work very well. But again, like I mentioned, kind of PlebNet has kind of faded a little bit, and now we have a little more large nodes with really big fat channels between them in the core of the Lightning Network, which has made the problem a little easier, right? That you just have more liquidity that's more readily available because nodes are more actively managed, or certainly have more capital in their nodes, which just have fewer nodes, right? If you have a smaller network, you need fewer hops to get across the network, smaller network with more channels. So as a result, routing, the problem itself has actually gotten a good chunk easier in the last few years. But okay, yeah, you still need a smart routing algorithm. If you're just super naive, it's gonna be horrendous. And algorithms have gotten a good chunk smarter, right? So LND, maybe a year ago or so, did their bimodal pathfinding assumption change, which helped them quite a good bit. Over the last year and a half, or I guess up to maybe a year ago, LDK extended the channel history look back, so it considers a lot more of your historical payment attempts, so keeps a lot more history when it's doing route finding, which gives it a lot more information to work off of. We also did something similar to the bimodal pathfinding that LND does. It's actually exponential, but it just makes the routing process faster, but whatever, it's basically the same thing. And as of like a year ago, at least the LDK router, which is what I spend most time on, I think others are also fairly good, is like really good. Like when I just send payments out to the whole network and just see what comes back, the probability estimates that my router had are relatively predictive of whether those paths actually succeeded, which tells me that we're pretty good. And generally, again, because the problem has gotten easier and our probability estimates have gotten a little smarter, the payments just kind of work now. Like, things work very reliably. Now it is in part because we have a lot of capital in the network, but things work very well. You would still have to have a lot of history. So if you just spin up a new node and you open some channels, even to good peers, your payments are going to fail. So this is something that has been built up over time, where we've been improving the scoring so that if you're a node that sends a lot of payments, your payments are always going to succeed. You have a lot of information to work off of, a lot of historical, where did that payment fail? You've learned a lot about the network graph. That works really well. So you do need some ability to get history, but that's also something we can solve at the software layer, right? So a lot of the LDK nodes in the various ecosystems have either, they'll do probing at one node and then they'll download files. We offer a snapshot for developers that they can use. They can download our, or at least my node's view of the network graph and my history of probes that I've sent, and they can apply that and use that data, and that works fairly well. If you do it from the perspective of the same LSP, it works very well. So this is something that while it can and do solve, and it's not all that hard, you just have to find a way to get history somewhere. There's got to be some node sending probes or sending lots of payments that learns a lot of information about the network graph, and you can download that. There's also just, a lot of people saw what looked like payment failures, or what looked like routing failures that weren't entirely routing failures. Like you'd have, oh, I can't send, there's not enough liquidity on my node. And it's like, okay, yeah, that was because the nodes were just pretty naive. We had all these problems of just, okay, you have to have that 1% of your channel reserved for punishment. Okay, now you have to have enough money in your channel so that when you go to pay, you can pay for that transaction fee in 3 months that you might actually never have to pay, but you have to reserve that money in the channel. And then you start adding all these things up, and all of a sudden, your channel that you thought was 100K sats can only send 75K sats, and your balance says you have, 25K sats, but you can only send 1 sat, and it's just led to a horrendous UX, right? So your payments would randomly fail even though you thought, your UI says you have enough balance. This is also something that we can and are fixing, so that 1% limit, if you're a client of an LSP, many LSPs just kind of let you get away with it. You don't really need that. They're always online. They don't need to be able to punish you. Also, Anchors helps this a lot. We don't have to reserve as much money for fees out in the future because we can just hold on to it. We can pay that fee later. TXV3 lets us get even further there, so we don't have to reserve any money for fees. So Bitcoin Core now lets us have transactions that have 0 fee as long as there's a CPFP that pays the fee that it would need. And so that basically we can remove all of these things. And if your balance says you have 100K sats, you can actually send 100K sats. So this is admittedly also still a little bit of a work in progress, but we're getting there. And we should be getting there very quickly now that all the pieces have lined up upstream in Bitcoin Core and in the Bitcoin network. We can start doing that stuff in Lightning, and it's going to make the UX really, really work. Also 2 years ago, I talked a lot about privacy issues in Lightning, and this one I think really got misinterpreted because Lightning has a lot of shortcomings in privacy, but privacy is like an onion, right? It's got layers. And if you didn't get that reference, I'm sorry, you're a terrible millennial, and you need to go rewatch Shrek. It's a great movie. So there's always more to do, right? There's so many layers to privacy. We fix the easy stuff, and then there's just more layers. And nothing has perfect privacy. Even we talk about Zcash is like the best privacy. Well, Zcash has a lot of issues with privacy in some regards. At some layers, there's just no privacy at all. And if you have an attacker that's gonna target one layer, then you might still have problems. And this is how it is with Lightning, right? So the top layer of like chain analysis can come back to the blockchain and do their analysis 5 years later after the transaction has already happened and figure out where the transaction was going and whatever. That is totally fixed with Lightning, right? So that attack just doesn't work. If you're not monitoring the Lightning network at the time of the transaction, you don't try to identify that information, it's probably too late. That transaction has happened, the data's gone, maybe you can bribe a node to get some historical data and figure it out, but probably not. That transaction's happened, the privacy's great. And that's the reality of Lightning today, right? There's not very many, as far as I'm aware, there's not many active attacks trying to identify payment flows. I know the big boys, chain analysis, these folks don't really do it yet. So the privacy's pretty good. And on top of that, we're also fixing other problems, right? So, we talked 2 years ago about recipient privacy. You publish an invoice that tells us who your node is. That's now fixed, right? Bolt 12 is here. You can use Bolt 12. It's super, super great. Just don't ask LND about it. But we'll get there. So yeah, it's great. Privacy is good. We're always working on improving it. In practice, active attacks are still a concern. Also, global passive attacks, if you're the NSA or something, maybe you can identify stuff. But the privacy is actually really good as far as cryptocurrency privacy goes. All right, so jamming. This is the other attack that kind of always comes up, is like, well, can't you just jam the Lightning Network? There's so many channels, and really sadly, channels are only support a few hundred HTLCs, right? So we have these big channels with tons of liquidity in them. We allocate all this capacity, all this liquidity into the Lightning Network, and then a channel can actually only hold a few hundred HTLCs, and then it gets stuck, right? And so HTLCs, they always clear pretty quick, right? You send a payment, it clears within a second, the HTLC gets cleared, it's great, except they don't have to, right? So they could take, a week to clear, and all of a sudden, those 400 slots are really locked up for a week, and you can't send any payments. But okay, I said future tense. This seems like we have some good options. So sugar-free Lightning is coming soon to a node near you. So the classic, there's two classes of solutions to this, right? So reputation and upfront fees. So if your node has a lot of reputation, probably you're not trying to jam me, and I can trust your HTLCs, and maybe nodes with bad reputation, I won't take all of their HTLCs. It doesn't work super great. Reputation is hard. Upfront fees is the other one. If you have to pay to jam, maybe we can make it expensive enough that people don't want to do it, or it's just not economical. It's not an attack worth doing. It's probably fairly expensive, so maybe that's not something we do. But it turns out we can combine these, and the results look promising. It's still a little early. We're still identifying new attacks on the designs people have come up with, but it looks like if we combine these, we end up with something that works fairly well, and hopefully coming very soon. More simulation, a little more work necessary, but it looks like things are coming along great. Okay, so thank you. I think we might have time for one question, maybe?
Yeah, we have time for one question.
All right, make it good. Did I cover everything? All right.
Nobody?
I
All right, big round of applause. Thanks, Matt.